I just want to say welcome to everyone. My name is Denise White. I'm the Colorado Municipal League's Engagement Communications Manager, and I'm excited to welcome you today, this afternoon, for this webinar, part of a 7-part series. It's actually 6 online with a webinar. You can join us in person at the annual conference, CML's annual conference in June, for another section of this if you are able to attend that. But it's a partnership we're doing with Recycle Colorado, really talking about the EPR program and how to kind of get that implemented over a series of 6 months here. So excited to welcome you to the first of our series here as we get into kind of EPR 101 and recycling. Before we get started, just going to kind of go through some housekeeping rules today. For our elected officials in attendance, you will get 1 university credit for being in the training today. Questions, if you've got questions along the way, hopefully we're mostly familiar with Zoom, but if you're not, you should have a chat feature at the bottom of your screen. And we invite you to drop your questions into the chat feature. We will have presentation and then time for Q&A. I'm going to introduce Jennifer Freeman here in a moment, who will help moderate and watch those questions as they come in. And again, I want to remind everybody that we are recording today's presentation, and we will be posting the materials from today's presentation as well as the recording on the CML.org training site, so you'll be able to access those. We will also be emailing those out to you following this webinar, probably tomorrow. And I know that Recycle Colorado will also share that with anybody that we need to get that shared with as well. So as we have a lot to cover today, I'm excited to turn this over. So I'm happy to introduce our Executive Director of Recycle Colorado, Liz Chapman. And I'm also going to introduce Jennifer Freeman, who is here supporting Recycle Colorado, as she'll be helping facilitate and moderate those questions. So Liz, do you want to take it away?
Thank you so much, Denise, and thank you to everyone for being here, both our presenters, our attendants, and a huge thank you to our friends over at the Colorado Municipal League for making this possible. I'm Liz Chapman, the Executive Director of Recycle Colorado. We are a statewide membership nonprofit, and I know a number of the local jurisdictions, a number of the municipalities on the webinar today are already members of Recycle Colorado, and I thank you so much for your support and engagement. And to those of you who represent municipalities who do not know about Recycle Colorado, we are a statewide organization with a mission to keep material out of the landfill and recirculating in the manufacturing system. And about 1/3 of our membership are local jurisdictions, counties, municipalities, towns across Colorado. And when we were having internal discussions amongst our various councils and committees within Recycle Colorado, we discovered that there were a number of towns and municipalities in the state that were not informed about what extended producer responsibility means and how it's going to impact their community and what, if anything, they can do to maximize the benefits that this program offers to their community. And that struck us as a place where we could partner with the CML folks and get this message out there so that your community better understands what is producer responsibility for packaging and paper. Shorthand, we all refer to that as EPR because producer responsibility for packaging and paper is a mouthful. And we know that there's a lot of misinformation. We want to clear it. Because the program is so complicated, that's why we've scheduled this series over several different meetings, so we can do a deep dive into various different elements. Exactly what the details are for the program have not yet been determined, so we will be keeping this discussion at a relatively high level and talking in broad strokes what the program is and what various communities can do to maximize the benefit it offers. And so with that, I am going to turn it over to the Circular Action Alliance Communications Coordinator for Colorado, Rachel Zerowan. I may have gotten her title wrong.
Really close enough. Communications manager, but yes, exactly, for Colorado. Yeah, so CAA, this is one of many acronyms that we're going to talk about today, Circular Action Alliance. So bear with me here while I go ahead and start sharing my screen. Let's see here. So we should be seeing, I believe, Yeah, a screen that says extended producer responsibility in Colorado. So I do have a little bit more housekeeping, your favorite thing, before we get into our agenda. But again, I'm Rachel Zarin with the Circular Action Alliance, and we'll learn more about what our organization does as it relates to EPR. But first, I want to let you know, let's see here, I'm not a lawyer. I can't give you legal advice. This does not constitute legal advice. So important note. I also want to let you all know that we are not going to be discussing pricing or promotions, salaries, or any other kind of competitive topics. It hasn't been an issue in any of the events I've been in so far, but if we start talking about it, we'll shut it down. So that's just some basics before we kick us off. But in the 15 minutes that I have, well, it's actually 20. So I'll spend about 15 minutes talking. We're going to do super high level, what is producer responsibility? We're going to get specific to Colorado, and then we're going to have about 5 minutes for questions. So if you have questions beyond that, throw them in the chat. I'll do my best to answer them. And then if I can't get to them, we're going to figure out how to follow up with those questions. But my goal would be to get to those in the chat if we don't get to them in person. Let's see. So with that, EPR. So this is the first acronym of the day. So this is extended producer responsibility, or simply producer responsibility. And the idea of this is that producers of products are funding the recycling, disposal, and in some cases, the composting of their packaging and paper. And then keep in mind, and that's instead of local governments and instead of taxpayers. So again, the producers are the ones who are funding the end of life of their packaging. In this case, again, packaging and paper. So keep in mind that dues, and we'll talk a little bit more about how dues factor in, the producers pay dues to achieve this, right? To make sure that those materials can be disposed of properly. Those dues can be structured in a way that incentivizes waste reduction. So again, a super high level of what is producer responsibility. So when we think about, oh, this is a big deal, right? This is big. How does this even execute on the streets? So that's where we get into the PRO, or the PRO. That's the Producer Responsibility Organization. So we at Circular Action Alliance, we are the PRO for Colorado, helping to implement the producer responsibility law for paper and packaging. At our core, we are producer-led, and we're a compliance organization. So we help producers comply with the legislation. We have some big tasks ahead of us, namely developing and implementing this program plan, which we're going to talk about. This is how we manage the covered products. And then keep in mind that our program plan, it's reviewed by a state-appointed advisory board, and then it's also got to be approved by the state regulatory agency, which in this case is CDPHE, or the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. So that is the role that we at CAA play when it comes to EPR. I told you we'd do alphabet soup. Let's see. So packaging and EPR in the US. So Colorado is not alone. California and Oregon Circular Action Alliance has been selected as the pro in those states. You can see on this map, there's other states that have passed it. And even not on this map are additional states who are exploring legislation this season. So we at CAA, you can see some of our founders there, right? These are large producers. So those are the folks that founded CAA, and we're going to help producers comply with all these state laws. As you saw on the map, we are the PRO in Colorado, California, and Oregon. And then when we think about our mission, like I said, at our core, compliance, we need to help producers comply. On top of that, we also want to harmonize across states while also recognizing that the needs are different and the regulations and laws are different a little bit across Oregon and California and Colorado, potentially others. So we want to harmonize and make life as easy as possible. There's a ton of folks doing great work already in Colorado. We want to build on that and build up that recycling, that existing recycling infrastructure and the existing recycling systems. And then we also want to advance the circular economy as far as paper and packaging. And what do I mean by that? When we say circular economy, it means we want to design products, we want to see the products designed for recyclability, for reuse, so that those materials keep coming in, and you can see where the circular comes from, as opposed to a take and make and trash kind of environment. So again, advancing the circular economy, reducing waste. Let's see. So that's a bit about CAA. So I'm going to keep blowing through here. Another thing that I didn't talk about that's super important, you can see in our mission, collaboration is key, right? Working with folks like yourselves, businesses and communities to reduce waste. That's critical to our success. I know I've gone through fast there. I am going to slow us down a bit as we start to hyper focus in on what EPR looks like specific to Colorado. So at the gist of Colorado's law is that, number one, producers need to join a PRO, a producer responsibility organization. Through that PRO, in this case, us, Circular Action Alliance, producers fund and manage the collection, processing, and recycling for packaging and paper products. So that's the heart of the law. And when we look at what's covered in Colorado, again, we talked about paper and packaging. I'm going to read this slide verbatim because I think it gives you some pretty tangible examples of what is paper and what is packaging. So covered packaging includes paper and glass, metal, flexible and rigid plastics, as well as other packaging. Keep in mind that this includes food service ware. So typically when we think about food service packaging, it's the package that is containing the product. So that's covered packaging. If we think about covered paper, flyers, brochures, booklets, catalogs, telephone directories, the legal definition of newspapers is a lot longer than what I've provided you here, but for the purpose of this webinar, keep in mind that printed news publications are not part of what's covered. So if we think about other elements of what's covered in the legislation, this legislation is really focused on the residential sector. Over time, some businesses will be included, but again, that's super important as we think about this as residential focus. And when I say residential, it also includes multifamily residences, so apartment buildings or condominium complexes, things like that. Another really great part of the Colorado law is that it includes recycling system funding, right? So what that means is when producers are paying dues to fund the end-of-life management of their packaging, part of those dues are also going to support funding for our recycling systems here in the state. So exciting stuff, big changes ahead. And I'm sure the question that you're all asking, what do I got to do? I'm going to start by kicking off and saying that there is no requirement for communities to participate and no requirement for citizens to participate. Do know when I say communities, I mean no requirement for municipalities, for cities, towns, counties, tribes. Nobody's required to participate, but do know that the communities who choose to participate will be reimbursed for the costs to recycle covered materials. So paper and packaging, that's a big deal, a big opportunity for your communities and your citizens. So also know that the communities who participate will be able to manage their own waste systems. So for example, if you're collecting your own waste, you can keep doing that from your community. If you're contracting with one hauler to collect waste, you can keep doing that. And if you're allowing multiple haulers to operate in an open market, you can keep doing that. So you can, the communities continue to manage their own waste. And like I said, no requirement for communities, service providers, or citizens to participate. Let's see. So again, this is a lot's happening fast. So what have we at CAA done so far? So last year we completed a statewide needs assessment and recycling scenario that was approved by the Joint Budget Committee of the Colorado Legislature. We also registered loads of producers and hired a staff. And then again, in that spirit of collaboration is key, we engaged more than 2,000 stakeholders to inform that program plan proposal. Remember, this is the program plan that will share how we intend to manage and implement that EPR program. So as it relates to that plan is due February 1st, which is in 2 days. Exciting stuff. Since that falls on a Saturday, so you can imagine our team is busy right now. So since that falls on a Saturday, we are technically allowed to submit it on February 3rd, which is the first business day following that Saturday deadline. So what this plan will do, again, fulfill those legislative requirements. It's going to incorporate all that wonderful research that came out of the needs assessment. We're going to look at how we can harmonize, right, with other states, and then still recognize what's unique to Colorado and what does Colorado need. And again, feedback, right? So we did consultation sessions last year that engaged more than 2,000 people. That has been critical in developing this program plan. So what is that plan going to do? Sustainable funding, number one, is what it will provide, the outcomes of this. That program plan will standardize a list of readily recyclable materials. All these actions will lead to an increase in recycling. The program plan also, and the legislation also calls for a statewide education and outreach campaign. And again, fostering that circular economy that we talked about earlier. So I'm going to keep us cruising so we have time for questions. And then as we think about where we're at next, so again, that deadline coming in hot. After that, the advisory board has 90 days to review it and send recommendations back to Circular Action Alliance, after which we have 60 days to respond. Another advisory board review, and then we suspect probably late September is when we're going to see CDPHE open a formal public comment period. If the plan is approved, that looks like a potential December plan approval. And then from there, CAA by legislation, again, I'm not making this one up. This all kind of came and was written into the legislation. We have 6 months to begin implementing the program plan. So when you think about when is this coming, what changes could happen in my community, you can think about potential December plan approval, implementation starting within 6 months of that plan approval. And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to leave this QR code up here for just a second. That's to sign up for the CAA newsletter. So if you sign up for that, you can check Colorado and show that you're interested in that. You're also welcome to reach out to me personally or our executive director, Yuri. Happy to field any questions that you may have. And then again, that newsletter is going to help you keep informed on big milestones, any developments or any webinars. So that's a really great place to get informed and sign up. So I'm going to see if I'm going to stop sharing. And then I know that was very fast. So I'm hopeful you guys have questions. That was very fast.
And I don't see any in the chat right now. So as I said, I'll if anybody, you got your opportunity now. If you got questions on that, we'll connect you with the experts later with contact information, but let us know if you got questions right now.
Liz, go ahead, and then we do have one question in the chat.
So my question is, how many producers have been registered, and what percentage of total obligated producers does Circular Action Alliance believe they have registered?
So that's a great question. So we are, along with submitting that plan, for the February 1 deadline, we'll need to submit that very information. So as far as the numbers of I was actually hoping to get that number for you today, but because I figured somebody would ask it since I put it in there, but I don't have that number. They're pulling that for me. So all that information, number of producers we have registered, as well as additional details, should come along with that program plan submission. More to come.
Thank you. Jonathan James asked, cardboard, question mark?
So, when the program plan comes out, that breaks materials down into minimum recyclables list. So all the items that are readily recyclable in Colorado. And while we will have details on what specific materials are on that uniform list, that will come out with the publication of the plan here in the next handful of days. We do know that cardboard is used in a lot of packaging, so I'll let you infer from there, but packaging is covered, and we're looking again on that list of on that minimum recyclables list. So again, that's that unified list of materials that will come out as part of the plan.
Great, thank you. Marty, hang in there for just a second for me. Dee got her question into the chat just before you did. Dee's question is, does this mean that reimbursements may not start until July 26th? And also, second question, I'm curious about why newspaper is not included in acceptable material.
Yeah, for sure. So as far as, I mean, I can't give a specific date on when reimbursement will begin. I would say, again, kind of like with the cardboard question, know that, you know, I mean, if the advisory board says, hey, this is a great plan, CDPHE recommend it, no changes, you know, we could see things happening sooner. But my guess, and we want that feedback, right? My guess is that we're going to see some back and forth. That's why we're looking at that December. So, I mean, again, dates are hard to tell, but know that we are required by law to begin implementation within 6 months of plan approval. Does that mean we're cutting checks on day one? You know, there's some stuff we got to get in place first. So I would hope to see, again, we got to get it going within 6 months. So it's going to happen fast. Oh, newspaper. See, I've already forgot that one. So well, ask me one, two, I only need to answer one, right? So newspaper, that one, I don't know. That's written into the legislation. So that's, oh, Jennifer, you may have more context on that. So Jennifer, and there, along with many people on this call, have worked in EPR longer than me. So please go ahead.
Sure. So when the bill was drafted, which feels like 20 years ago at this point, but was just a couple of years ago, the sponsor, Lisa Cutter, wanted to make sure that communities, people had ready access to the news, right? Where they get their sources of information in their community, and certainly nationally, in the state and nationally as well. So that is why there is an exemption on the dues for newspapers. Okay.
Thank you.
Marty, thank you so much for your patience. Go ahead. Did you change your mind?
I think we might have.
There we go. Yeah, no problem at all. Sorry, I'm clicking too fast. For the reimbursements, and maybe you can't speak to all the details, but is the structure of that going to be like per, you know, a per account served, you know, so you'll get a flat reimbursement? You know, would it be based on, you know, a hauler just, I'm thinking particularly hauling here, but, you know, a hauler just submits their, you know, instead of billing a customer X dollars a month, they round that all together and send that bill to the state? Or is the state going to say, you know, here's a flat rate that we are going to reimburse you for on a per customer basis, and any additional amount, if you can't meet that level, you know, you're still going to have to pass that cost on to your customers? Because yeah, just trying to figure out what will keep haulers in particular from not like over asking on, you know, just saying like all of a sudden it costs so much more to provide the service. Yeah, I'm just confused about how that reimbursement process is going to roll out in an equitable way.
Yeah, great question. So while there will be a lot more detail once that plan is published on our website, what I can speak to now is I can kind of speak to what, the outreach that Circular Action Alliance has done to date. So I guess just for context for the other folks listening in on the call, one of the things that Marty was talking about is how, and it's actually not the state reimbursing people, it would be Circular Action Alliance, right? Because we're that producer responsibility organization that's collecting the dues from producers, and that's what's being used to reimburse communities for the cost of recycling, right? Maybe it's reimbursing a community, maybe in some cases it's reimbursing the hauler, right, for the cost of recycling. So what Marty was asking about is, what does that reimbursement look like, right? How do we prevent haulers or whoever, city, it could be anyone, right, from saying, oh, it costs this much, or, kind of these wild numbers. So what was talked about when CAA originally did outreach was the potential for something called zone pricing, where based on research, there may be a range of reimbursements for that zone. And then anything wildly above that, because maybe somebody does actually have really high costs due to some factor, that entity could then submit those details to CAA to really have an understanding of why those costs are so high. So that's what was talked about during the consultation sessions. And then what you'll see in the program plan when that comes out in the next handful of days is just a bit more detail around how that's going to work for reimbursement to communities.
Okay, well, I hope that answered your question. We are at time for that segment. Thank you so much, Rachel, for all that information. I'm going to put the link to CAA's website, where you'll find much more information in the chat here. Please feel free to reference that for additional information. Thank you very much again, Rachel, for all the information. Next, we want to introduce one way to kind of start. If you're kind of starting from scratch, or you are looking to expand your program, or you just kind of want to take the pulse of the of your community on where you want to go with any of your recycling or sustainability efforts, we wanted to introduce you to Tara Batali from HDR and Mary Hester from the city of Wheat Ridge, who have a really great case study on where you might begin. Tara?
Thank you so much, Jennifer. Hello, everyone. My name is Tara Batali, as Jennifer mentioned. I'm with HDR. We're a consulting firm with an office based in Denver. We were hired by the city of Wheat Ridge to help with their public engagement effort for this waste hauling program. We're going to give you a little bit of background on that and talk about what our process was and some of our best practices and lessons learned. And you'll notice through our process and ultimately what our recommendations were for next steps, EPR and the CAA work was definitely top of mind. So you'll see some of that connection and synergy here in just a little bit. I will pull up the slide deck, Mary, if you want to introduce yourself.
Sure. Thanks, Tara. Hi, everyone. I'm Mary Hester. I am the Sustainability Coordinator for the City of Wheat Ridge, and we are excited to share our project with you.
Thank you. And let me just make sure I get my clickers here. So here's our quick agenda. Like Rachel, we will be moving pretty quickly. There's a lot of good information here, but we want to leave time for questions. So first, Mary is going to give a history of the project and what the city had done in order to tee up this particular effort that HDR assisted them with over the last year and a half.
Sure. Thanks, Tara. And so, yeah, this project took place between July 2023 and November 2024. So we just recently wrapped it up. We'll go over some of the history behind it. So Wheat Ridge is an open market community. You all are probably aware of what that means, but everyone is responsible for selecting and setting up their own service. And in Wheat Ridge, we typically have around 7 to 8 haulers in operation at any given time. And we're a pretty small community of about 32,000 residents. And we don't have any requirements for our haulers other than just needing a business license, so they don't have to offer recycling or composting or adhere to certain pickup days. They just needed to get a license. And so in 2010, we actually had a question on the ballot about moving to a single hauler contract, and that failed. And then this project has really been the first major re-engagement of this topic since that time. And the topic of waste management has been a high priority for our sustainability committee, made up of resident volunteers. Prior to kicking off this project, they had presented just some high-level information to our city council about other waste management methods like single hauler, enhanced licensing requirements, and what some of our nearby peer communities had done. And at that time, council directed us to go ahead and move forward with a public engagement project. So not choosing any one system at that time, but just moving forward with public engagement to hear from as many people as possible about what they think of our current open market system and is there an appetite for change. And so this came up often over the years in previous engagement efforts. We heard comments about waste, people being frustrated with the open market system throughout just some of our neighborhood programs, our resident surveys. And so we felt like it was good timing. More specifically, on the screen in front of you, these are some of the things that we heard that people are frustrated about with our open market system. And so it just felt like good timing to see, are people interested in change and what might those changes be?
Wonderful. Thank you, Mary. And so that came to the city releasing an RFP specifically for public engagement related to this particular topic. And what's interesting is that the city really leaned into wanting to know what their community felt about these topics before we actually did any technical analysis like a landfill site location or more programmatic or operational decisions as it relates to hauling and recycling. So they really flipped it on its head a little bit. When we typically do public engagement related to a technical project, they really wanted to hear what the community thought of as big programmatic or even smaller, lower hanging fruit efforts. And so we'll talk a little bit about how that was a unique position for this engagement team, because we really wanted to make sure that we were unbiased. And so in a nutshell, the project really wanted to aim to understand those public opinions about the current system and really potential changes to the system moving forward. And again, it was anything under the sun you could think of. We had some preconceived ideas of potential programs based on peer cities across the country, but we really wanted to hear what they thought would be best for their particular community. And so with that purpose in mind, we developed these set goals. So maximize the engagement, true to all of our projects that we work on. We really want to make sure we see a broad and hear from a broad spectrum of city residents, and not just those who are typically civic minded or participating in government programs and projects. And wanted that active participation in all corners and throughout all of the demographics in Wheat Ridge. We also wanted to make sure that the tactics and tools and information that we shared was accessible and inclusive. So we had digital and in-person efforts to make sure that we maximized that return on investment. And this is the topic I was talking about a little bit ago, of that unbiased neutral position that we had. So HDR as the consultant team, but the city's team in this project as well, really didn't want to sway the community at all. Typically, again, when we have our projects, we want to push them to support a particular improvement, whether that be a transportation or water or recycling effort. Here, we just wanted all of the feelings. We wanted all of the opinions to make sure that we were analyzing all of those different aspects of the community's thoughts. We also wanted to use this as an opportunity to inform and educate. So not just gather input, but really make them see what the impacts of particular decisions could be, why recycling and sustainability is important when we look at growth within our communities and more people living in denser areas, those types of things. So we definitely used it as an educational opportunity. The end goal of our outcome really was to empower City Council, our decision makers within the city, to feel confident in what that further direction on waste management decisions and approaches would be. So as you'll see when we move through to the end recommendations, some of them were quite tangible and some of them were really just kind of broader in terms of getting more educated in the system, particularly with particularly with EPR, Recycle Colorado, et cetera. So you'll see how we were able to make recommendations that fit both of those molds. But at the end of the day, City Council has the power essentially to make decisions on next steps. So we wanted to make sure that the data and the information we shared was something that they could adequately respond to. In looking at the efforts, we broke down our project into 4 phases. The first one being our analysis and our plan development. So this is where we did a lot of stakeholder interviews. We did some demographic research. Then we moved quickly after that into understanding hauling options. And you're going to hear later about a lesson learned associated with this being our first step. But we wanted to throw all of the hauling options out to the community with all of the things that those hauling options would mean and what those fee structures would be, and tell us how you feel. And you'll see what we heard as we dove into that phase. And then the third phase, we took that information and we structured phase 3 to really focus on programs, specifically based again on that feedback. And then our final phase, the report, the recommendations, and getting council to feel empowered about making decisions. You'll see at the bottom here a number of things we did throughout each phase: promotional materials, digital surveys, open house, pop-up events, which is a really key best practice, and then briefings to decision makers and community groups. So in that first phase, we did a deep dive in our community and we analyzed exactly what our demographics were. So that way we can make sure we knew how to tailor our particular engagement efforts. So we didn't want to just do 10 public open houses across the city, because that's what we do in government projects and that's how we run our input opportunities. We wanted to be strategic, and that not only brings a bigger return on investment, which is most important, but it ultimately saved time and budget in terms of what our tactics were for engagement. We looked specifically at digital device use. How are people getting their information and news? We looked at race, ethnicity, and language. We wanted to make sure our materials were accessible by different languages based on the demographics. Spanish rose to the top as the secondary language aside from English in the community, so our materials were translated. And then environmental and political sentiment. So we were able to pull data to actually understand what's generally the political mindset of the community, and then what is their feeling about global warming, climate change, recycling in general. So we were able to actually utilize other surveys that our database pulls from to understand what their sentiments were there, which was really important for us to know where to start. We also conducted stakeholder listening sessions with a number of these groups. So the committee that Mary had talked about, our sustainable neighborhood leaders. So the city does have that banded together. Generally, we just talked to community members, so some of those key influencers within the city. And then we did have an interview with the key editor of the newspaper that has provided a lot of commentary and opinion pieces and other news articles in those efforts that Mary had talked about earlier. And some of the key takeaways in general: traffic, noise pollution, looking at more of those sustainable recycling and composting efforts. How does that impact our aging population or our elderly population? What are the incentives if we were to switch? So all of that came to fruition. And then we also did a focus group with the haulers, which I think we were all maybe just a smidge nervous about, because we weren't quite sure how they'd feel about a potential change that could monopolize perhaps or decrease their presence in the city. But they were really not concerned about this engagement effort in particular. I think they appreciated that they were considered. So if you're looking at something similar, I highly recommend you talk with your haulers early on in this process. They certainly, not a surprise, don't like contracted systems because it lacks that competition. And they're a little bit anxious about the EPR efforts and how that will impact their operations. So early on in this, before we even really knew what EPR and the great work that CAA and the team are doing, they were still worried a little bit about that. And so again, an opportunity to share more information related to those efforts. So after that phase one, we dove right into phase two, and we gathered all that information, finalized our engagement plan, and kicked off that second phase where we talked about hauling options. For the efforts, we did pop-up events. So this is becoming a more popular tactic, and it's super easy and a good ROI. Go where people are already meeting. Show up at fairs and festivals, go to dense supermarkets and parks. Those types of things are going to be critical. Social media content and graphics are also important. Even in our lower income demographic areas, we still see a high percentage of people with smart devices, access to data plans, and social media. So historically, when we assumed that lower income populations maybe didn't have access to those digital devices and platforms, we are finding that is trending upwards, and social media is key. And then still want to recognize the demographic that loves the newspaper, whether that be digital or hard copy. So we did have advertisements, and then took advantage of the city's deep list of e-newsletter subscribers and made sure we shared information across that. Visuals matter a lot. This is true for any public engagement campaign or effort. Consistency in brand, consistency in iconography, and graphics and imagery and colors. One place to go, so the QR code that goes to the What's Up Wheat Ridge page for this project. All of that is really important for the community to not just trust the process and trust the city's engagement in this, but it also adds a little fun and a little color to something that can be highly technical. Oops. So in phase 1 and 2, when we looked at the open house and our digital surveys for phase 2 in particular, we had a self-guided online meeting, that open house, and then pop-up events, and then a number of other promotional flyering, yard signs, et cetera, that went throughout the community. We had about 700 people reached with 330 or so online surveys and nearly 900 comments received. So considering this is such a niche and really focused topic, we were really happy with that outcome. And I think most importantly is the geographic dispersion of our comments. So you'll see in this map that we had people from all corners of the city and everyone in between. And I think even some comments from people who maybe work but don't live in the city. And certainly that's okay too, it was great to see that we were able to get a good cross section of the city. This is the thing that rocked us a little bit. When we looked at the data from phase 2, we saw, okay, nearly half the respondents of this survey thought the system worked well, and about half didn't. And so that really put us in a conundrum of, okay, so we really are split as in terms of the sentiment of whether the open market system is working. And then what they didn't like about it, again, pretty dispersed here on the options that we gave them. Cost being number one, that's probably not a surprise to you. Lack of large item pickup, that's really critical when we think of what we did in phase 3, when we look at programs. Customer service, of course, is important. We had a number of people say, well, if you change the trash hauler that I have, he rolls my bin up to my gate because I'm 85 years old and I can't make that trek with my bin, and he knows that, so he brings it up. Will somebody be able to do that for me? We were hearing that level of personal connection to haulers in Wheat Ridge, and it was really important for us to keep that in mind. And then you'll see close to customer service was lack of compost options. So that was nice to hear that there were some sustainability topics coming top of mind. So our key takeaways, as I mentioned, split vote, so to speak, in terms of support of or opposition to. When we really looked into the data, though, we saw that really 56%, however, of the survey respondents would be interested in some change to the current system. Now, the level of change varied amongst that, but we knew that a little more than half wanted something new, something different. And so we took that into consideration. And again, noting that choice and cost were the top two factors in terms of what their value is when thinking about hauling. So we took all of that data and we created a survey that said, okay, wait a second, the community is not ready for a full overhaul of the system. It's not looking like we're going to get through a whole change to, a contracted hauling system or a municipal hauling system. That wasn't giving us the warm and fuzzies. We really wanted to make sure that we dug even deeper. And so with our waste planning team internally that we have at HDR, we were able to dissect that and make this phase 3 be really specific into those tangible program things. So we wanted to understand what services specifically they wanted. Curbside versus drop-off collection, both hauling and recycling efforts, collection frequency, weekly, bi-weekly, does that change for recycling? What about composting? How would the fees impact the participation in some of these programs? So if the recycling was free, would they recycle more? Would they be interested in it? Of course, we heard a lot of that, but those are the types of questions we wanted to ask. And then when we heard about yard waste and large item pickup, what does that seasonal participation look like? Is that something we can start with and then ease into a bigger program? So again, those are the main services that we looked at there on the bottom. Recycling and compost, yard waste, and large item were critical topics in our phase 3 survey. And the results were really great to hear that. Again, these are people who were like, don't change my open market, but I kind of want to do better when it comes to how I dispose of my trash and what that waste diversion looks like. So 70% supported financial incentives for decreasing trash, such as a pay-as-you-throw system. So there was some interest there. 78% would recycle more if the recycling services were included at no additional cost. Again, no surprise. Free things make people more interested in participating. So if that were to be something we could do, then how do we make it easy for them to participate? And then 59% were interested in a drop-off facility. And when we look at all of that data together, we broke up our recommendations into 3 key tiers. Tier 1 activities that can be achieved utilizing existing staff, resources, and funding. Wheat Ridge already had a couple of yearly or twice a year programs for large item efforts. So how can we continue to grow upon that? How can we add more frequency to those once or twice a year events? Tier 2, activities that may require a study, it may need a little bit of an extra resource or funding mechanism to it. And then tier 3, we're going to be long-term efforts like a new site for recycling or a new landfill that has additional diversions. Like those types of big new programs were part of our tiers as well. And so here were the final recommendations after all of this data was compiled and we looked at what was feasible. Recommendation 1, tier 1. Expand TLC cleanup days and other annual events. How can we just do a little bit more? So great, that's a fairly low-hanging fruit item. Recommendation 2, this was a tier 2/3. It sort of teetered on being a pretty highly fundable effort, but implementing a permanent drop-off site for yard waste and recycling specifically. Recommendation 3, evaluate seasonal yard waste and expand large item collection. This was a tier 2. So this was something that we could likely utilize the TLC cleanup days. Perhaps we could use an existing site to have these programs. Recommendation 4 was a tier 1/2. The city does have a dedicated communications and engagement and marketing team. So can we have them implement some more educational or campaign efforts related to recycling and waste diversion, or do they need to hire someone specifically with that? That's why it sort of teetered. And then the 5th recommendation, this is where this group here with CAA and EPR comes into play. Educate the city and stay engaged with the extended producer responsibility efforts. We purposefully made this as a recommendation because of the impacts to this whole potential fee structure or what that cost to the end user could look like. So this was a no-brainer for us to include. And what we did after we presented this to council, we adjusted and deviated a little bit of these recommendations, and Mary and her colleagues went back and adjusted some of the things that were in our report. For example, the council was not poised or ready to do a permanent drop-off site. Great, let's table that and do these other smaller programmatic things. But they all said, heck yes, when we talked about recommendation number 5. They definitely want to be educated. They want to stay informed with CA and EPR efforts. And so this is where we're at now. Mary and team are continuing to piece together what these programs could look like, and they'll go back to council to actually present any sort of resource or funding that they're going to need to implement that. So this is a really big, high level public engagement effort that's now going to start to create or implement smaller programs based on that feedback. And Mary's going to talk about some of our key takeaways. I highlighted in green: early and often briefings with your elected officials are really important, especially if you are part of an organization that would need their support. Go ahead, Mary.
Sure. Thanks, Tara. And I'll try and hurry along so we have time for questions. I'll start with the lessons learned and then move over to the best practices. And I'll maybe just pick one from each. I think the big lesson learned, and Tara kind of hinted at it, at the end of the day, if we had the chance to go back and do this project again, knowing what we know now, I think that we might flip-flop our order of how we did our public engagement, our surveys, and kind of what we were asking people to consider in our 2 big pushes there. So like Tara mentioned, we started out just informing, like, here are the pros and cons of these major systems, like open market, single hauler, preferred hauler. What do you think about that? That's where we quickly learned that there wasn't going to be the will for a big systematic large scale change. And then we tried to go back and say, well, okay, what do people want? What do people need? I think, and who knows if this would have changed the outcome at all, but possibly had we done, spent more time trying to figure out what people want, people need, maybe we could have better tailored kind of the pros and cons and the information that we were sharing with people of how they would have been impacted by each system. And maybe that would have changed their feedback, maybe not. That was kind of our big sentiment at the end of the project. We thought we might have flip-flopped our order. And then I also think another big lesson learned is really making sure that you are clear, just super clear about what your goals are and your desired outcomes. I think at the beginning of our project, I heard from a lot of people who thought, well, you're just doing all of this engagement for show. The city has already decided we're going to go to single hauler. Oh no. And finally, we were able to convince people, no, truly no decision has been made. We really just want your opinions. And I think that made people feel a lot more comfortable to share their opinions with us. And then jumping over to best practices, I think a big thing that we learned, there happened to be just a bunch of public engagement projects going on in Wheat Ridge at the time that we were doing this. And so jumping together on open houses, like we had an open house where the comp plan, park and rec master plan, stormwater master plan, we were there, and everyone could just go around and kind of give their feedback to each project at one time. And we were hoping that that would kind of cut down on engagement fatigue and just make it easier for people to participate. So I think I'll wrap it up there so that we'll have time for questions.
And I'll stop sharing.
Thanks, Tara and Mary. Do we have any questions? I don't see any in the chat at the moment.
I'd be interested if anyone has already been thinking about this or is actively looking at rolling something like this out, or if this is a brand new idea for you.
I'd invite you to just drop that in the chat. Yep.
So Marianne left a question in the chat. Marianne Mate asked, was municipal waste / recycling considered?
Sure, I can handle that. Yes, that was initially in our first public survey. That was one of the methods that we were educating people on the pros and cons about. ultimately for Wheat Ridge, we're not a full service city, so that would be a huge lift just to get the staff and funding. And so we made that clear in our cons, and people seemed to agree with that and didn't really think that it was a feasible option. So in the ranking, it was, I don't remember where it ended up, but it was not at the top.
MJ from Lakewood asks, for the 41 to 44% of people who said they did not want to do single hauler, what was their main reasons or concerns?
Yeah, good question. I'll start, Mary. You can fill in some gaps since I know you've been staying close to these data sets that we've been gathering. One of their main reasons or concerns primarily was their potential lack of cost negotiation. So when you look at if people have an open market and a choice of hauler, they can then sort of control that cost within their reasonable means better. And I would say a secondary concern of theirs was that customer service, that feeling. I had talked about it early, the group of folks who we heard from who really have bonded with their hauler and appreciate some of the extra steps that they take to make the hauling and trash service attractive to them or easier for them to participate in. I think those were some key thoughts. But Mary, anything to add in terms of concerns with single hauler?
Yeah, not too much more to add. I think the big thing was just people were really concerned that we would take away their choice of being able to pick their hauler. And I think also stemming from that concern that if we did that, maybe it's working well for them right now, then we're going to switch to a system and nothing's going to work and their trash is never going to get picked up and it's going to cost more. So I think just general hesitation around, I guess, having your control over something taken away.
Yeah. The choice, like even if they couldn't really articulate what about it, they weren't loving, they just didn't want their choice taken away. And I saw Laura's comment. That's great to know from Golden.
So Mayor Weinberg from Golden posted in the chat, Golden has been a single hauler pay-as-you throughout community for 12 plus years and added curbside compost, semi-annual yard waste pickup, and large item pickup several years ago. Hard initial change for the community, but once adopted has been great.
Yeah, and I think at the end of the day for this program, we all know change is hard, but to the mayor's point, can definitely pay off in spades. For Wheat Ridge, just wasn't the time. I think these smaller programs to get people kind of more excited about this diversion will help maybe lead into a potential hauling change. Mary, anything else? Okay.
Yeah, I hope, and I think that this will be a step forward. I think it would have been really easy for us to shut down the project after the first survey when it was clear that we weren't going to make a big change, which is kind of what we thought maybe going into this project. Just, try and pivot, do what you can. I hope that this will be progress for us. And I don't think that this will prevent us from having this conversation again in the future.
Again, Beth Markham. Hi, Beth. Thanks for joining us. Mentioned she's from the town of Vail, is currently reviewing proposals from haulers to move to a single hauler system as well. So
good luck.
Beth, is there anything else that you'd add? Thanks for jumping in.
Yeah, no problem. We're just in the thick of it right now, reviewing proposals. We'll be interviewing haulers in the next couple weeks, I think, and then taking back staff recommendations to council and seeing what they decide to go with. So happy to share our experience with you, Alicia. I noticed you mentioned you want to connect on that so far. And TBD, we had tried to go down this path a couple different times in the past and hadn't made it past council. And this go round, we were directed by council to do this. So a little flip in leadership, and we'll see where we end up.
How has the public been reacting to that process?
It's a good question. We haven't gotten a lot of negative feedback about it per se. There are some of the same sentiments that Wheat Ridge had mentioned, that Mary had mentioned about, people like their hauler and they don't necessarily want to switch. we've had some of that, but I think we also have some others who are excited about some potential cost savings when you go to the municipalized route. So we'll see how it all works out. Stay tuned.
Thanks, Beth. So we're at the top of the hour. Adam, thanks very much for your comment. Adam Farmer is offering to work with anyone interested in collecting and recycling film. He's an end market user here in Colorado. We are super grateful. I'm going to kick it back to Denise to wrap us up. From Recycle Colorado, Liz, I don't want to speak for you. Thank you very much for joining us. Denise, why don't you take it home?
Sure. And thank you both for, as I said, Liz wants to pop back on. She can always have one last word here too. But do want to say thank you to Liz Chapman, Jennifer, both with Recycle Colorado, for helping us bring this series forward this year. Also, thank you to all of our presenters, Rachel with Circular Action Alliance, Mary with City of Wheat Ridge, and Tara with HDR. Just also thank you to our participants. We know there's a lot going on every day, so we really thank you for taking time to learn with us today. As a reminder, we will be posting this recording as well as some of the all the materials on our website, cml.org. We'll email it out to the same list that registered, and we'll make sure that Recycle Colorado has it for their members as well. And then finally, just want to remind everybody, this is the first of a 6-part series, 7 if you can get to conference. And our next webinar on this topic will be on February 26th. That's a Wednesday at 2 o'clock. We will be focused on collection models at that time, and you can register for that at cml.org on our training calendar. And I think that is all we have to say. So thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing, if not all of you, more of you next time.